The sun is still below the horizon when the carrier deck comes alive. Steel groans under boots. Engines cough, then roar. The Pacific air is thick with salt and fuel. A young Navy pilot climbs into a fighter that feels wrong the moment he settles in. It is big, heavy, armored. Nothing like the agile planes he trained in. Ahead of him, the deck officer raises a hand. Somewhere beyond that dark water, Japanese pilots are already airborne. They fly the Zero Light. Graceful, lethal. A plane that has embarrassed the U.S. Navy for more than a year. This machine in front of him was built to change that. Built not to dance, but to survive. Built to hit hard and keep flying. Yet among pilots, whispers follow it down the deck. Too heavy. Too unforgiving. One mistake, and it will not forgive you. The engine surges. The deck blurs. As the fighter lifts into the morning sky, the pilot doesn't wonder whether he'll meet the enemy today. He wonders whether his own aircraft will be the thing that kills him, and why the Navy was desperate enough to build it anyway. By the time the United States entered the war, the balance of air power in the Pacific was already tilted-end. Everyone knew it. In 1940, when reports of a new Japanese naval fighter began circulating, Western analysts dismissed them. Japan, they believed, lacked the industrial base to build a truly modern carrier aircraft. What arrived instead over China, then Southeast Asia, shattered that assumption. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was light, fast, and astonishingly agile. It could outturn anything the Allies had in the sky. It climbed quickly. It flew farther than expected, and in the hands of well-trained Japanese naval aviators, it was devastating. When Pearl Harbor burned in December 1941, the Zio was already combat-proven. In the months that followed, it dominated the air from the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies. Allied pilots flying American and British aircraft found themselves outmatched again and again. The problem was not courage. It was physics. Most American fighters in the early Pacific War were designed with different assumptions. They were built for speed at altitude, for durability, for pilots who might face brief engagements over Europe, not prolonged dogfights over endless ocean. Against the Zero, those assumptions failed. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat could absorb punishment, but it could not turn with the Zeron. The P-40 Warhawk was fast in a dive, but bled energy quickly in a fight. Pilots learned harsh lessons in the first seconds of combat. If they tried to fight the Zero on its terms, they died. By mid-1942, casualty reports told a grim story. Squadrons were losing experienced pilots faster than they could be replaced. New pilots were being rushed to carriers with minimal combat training. Survivors spoke of the Zero with a mixture of respect and fear. The aircraft had flaws, no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, but exploiting those flaws required discipline and teamwork. In the chaos of early battles, discipline was often the first thing to collapse. For the U.S. Navy, the situation was intolerable. Carrier warfare depended on air superiority. Without it, fleets were blind and vulnerable. Every carrier lost meant thousands of lives and months of industrial effort erased in minutes. The Navy did not need a fighter that merely matched the Zero. It needed one that could dominate it. The order was clear, even if the solution was not. Design a new aircraft, design it fast. Design it now, but above all, design it to keep the pilot alive. At Grumman's factories, engineers worked with urgency that bordered on desperation. They studied combat reports, line by line. They listened to pilots who had survived encounters with the Zero, and to the silence left by those who had not. One truth emerged quickly. Trying to outturn the Zero was a losing strategy. The new fighter would not be built to dance. It would be built to strike. That meant power, armor, heavy guns. It meant accepting weight, where Japanese designers had avoided it. It meant betting that survival mattered more than elegance. The result was an aircraft that looked nothing like the Zero. Where the Japanese fighter was slender, this one was broad. Where the Zero was light, this one was dense. Where the Zero rewarded instinctive maneuvering, this one demanded discipline. On paper, it promised something the Navy desperately needed: speed, firepower, and the ability to take a hit and keep flying. But paper did not sit in a cockpit at sea. Paper did not face a turning zero with a sun at its back. When the first pilots climbed into the new fighter during training, enthusiasm was not the dominant emotion. Some felt reassured by the armor plate behind their heads. Others felt trapped inside a machine that seemed slow to respond. Carrier landings were unforgiving. Low-speed handling was nothing like the nimble trainers they knew. Accidents followed, hard landings, overshoots, fatal mistakes during approaches. The aircraft did not forgive sloppy flying, and word spread quickly among squadrons. This was the fighter meant to save the Pacific Fleet. And already, some pilots were calling it something else entirely: a death trap. Yet the war did not pause for doubts. As carriers prepared for new offensives, there were not enough alternatives. The aircraft would go to Ready or not, and soon pilots would learn whether fear of the machine was justified or whether misunderstanding it was the real danger. The fighter that worried so many pilots did not look dangerous at first glance. It looked excessive. Its nose was thick with metal. Its wings were broad. The fuselage carried armor plate, where earlier American fighters had carried little more than hope. Beneath the cowling sat an engine far larger than anything the Zero had ever flown behind. The philosophy behind the design was blunt and unapologetic. If the Zero won by agility, this aircraft would win by endurance. If the Zero relied on a skilled pilot avoiding hits, this aircraft would assume it would be hit and survive anyway. The heart of the machine was a massive radial engine producing well over 2,000 horsepower. It gave the fighter speed in level flight and a brutal advantage in a dive. Paired with a large propeller and strong wings, it allowed the aircraft to recover from maneuvers that would tear lighter fighters apart. But every advantage came at a cost. The weight changed everything. Acceleration felt sluggish compared to lighter aircraft. Low-speed handling was unforgiving. On approach to a carrier call ready, the most dangerous phase of naval aviation, the aircraft demanded precision. There was little margin for error. Pilots who mishandled power or angle of attack did not get second chances. Training squadrons struggled. Many pilots arrived fresh from flight schools, designed around smaller, more responsive planes. Transitioning to the new fighter required unlearning habits that had once kept them safe. The aircraft did not reward instinct. It rewarded procedure. That distinction mattered in combat. A pilot who tried to yank the aircraft into a tight turn, as they might against a slower opponent, could find themselves bleeding airspeed at exactly the wrong moment. Against a Zero, that mistake could be fatal. Early combat reports reinforced the fear. In inexperienced hands, the aircraft could be unforgiving. Losses mounted not because the fighter was weak, but because it punished the wrong tactics mercilessly. This was where the death trap reputation took hold. It was not born solely from enemy fire. It was born from pilots dying during training, during landings, during moments when the aircraft behaved exactly as designed but not as expected. Yet even as doubt spread, something else began to surface in the data. When pilots flew the aircraft as intended using speed, altitude, and teamwork, the results changed dramatically. In dives, it outran the Zero. In vertical maneuvers, it held energy longer. When hit, it often brought its pilot home. Armor plate stopped rounds that would have killed men in lighter fighters. Self-sealing fuel tanks reduced fires. Damage that would have destroyed a Zero became survivable. The aircraft was not agile in the traditional sense. But it was stable, predictable, strong. Slowly, instructors adjusted training. Doctrine shifted. Pilots were taught to avoid turning fights at all costs. They learned to attack from above, strike once, and climb away. Speed became life. Discipline replaced bravado. The fighter began to reveal its true nature not as a dogfighter, but as a predator. Still, the stigma remained. Stories travel faster than statistics. One fatal crash on a carrier deck erased a dozen successful missions in the minds of those who watched it happen. Fear spread more quickly than confidence ever could. And looming over everything was the enemy. Japanese naval aviators were not passive observers. They adapted to it. They learned to bait American pilots into turning engagements. They exploited hesitation. They targeted inexperienced flyers who had not yet mastered their machines. By late 1943, the Pacific Air War stood at a crossroads. The United States had built an aircraft powerful enough to challenge the Zero, but only if pilots accepted its limitations and abandoned old instincts. The machine demanded respect, patience, and restraint. Those who resisted paid a price. Those who learned began to survive. The fighter was going to face the Zero in numbers now. Not in trials or isolated encounters, but in large carrier battles where mistakes multiplied and lessons were written in blood. The question was no longer whether the aircraft was dangerous. The question was whether pilots could change fast enough to unlock what it was built to do. And that answer would emerge not in classrooms or manuals but in the sky, where theory ended and combat began.